Today we're going to learn about the Linnaean system of classification, in which we classify organisms based on their physical similarities. So before we get started, make sure you have a copy of your Power Notes sheet and follow along as we go. Feel free to pause the video as needed to take notes on your sheet. So we're going to start with just defining what taxonomy actually is. And this is going to be the branch of biology that is involved with naming and classifying organisms. So for example, we have a picture of a tree on the screen here, and this tree is a white oak. Scientists, however, give it a specific scientific name based on its classification of being an oak. All oaks have the same first name in their scientific name, and that is the name of Quercus. And we're going to talk a little bit more on the next few slides about how that scientific name is determined and how it is written. And basically, the act of classifying something and naming it this way is what we refer to as taxonomy. It's called taxonomy because the word taxon itself refers to a single level within our classification system. So what do I mean by that? If you take a look at your Power Notes sheet, okay, there's a place here that lists the 7 taxa. Each level from 1 through 7 would represent a single taxon. And sometimes it's more helpful to use the generic term taxon rather than trying to pick a specific level in here. So we'll talk about that more in just a moment. The person who first came up with this classification system was named Carl Linnaeus, and he was a Swedish scientist. He set out on this very ambitious mission to categorize and name all of the living things on Earth and give them each a unique 2-part name. He actually wrote about it in Systema Naturae here. That's his contribution to our classification knowledge, and he actually was pretty successful in naming and classifying a great variety of different organisms. We still use the basis of his system today, and that's how we determine an organism's scientific name, which is a 2-part name consisting of the name of the genus it belongs to and a single descriptive word for each species within that genus. So we call this binomial nomenclature. Binomial nomenclature, it simply means that everything has a 2-part scientific name. And these names come from Latin, sometimes Greek or Latinized words. And what I mean by Latinized would be this example here. We have George Engelmann pictured, and to the right of him are the Engelmann spruce. There's 2 of them in that picture, called Picea engelmannii. Now, obviously, Engelmannii came from the last name of a person, and it is not a real Latin word. But sometimes organisms are named in honor or in memory of a person, somebody who had a great contribution to the field. And so instead of having a true Latin name, it's a Latinized version of some word. So when we write scientific names, there's certain conventions that we always follow. Make sure that you are making a note of this at the very bottom of your note sheet. What is the proper way to write a scientific name? Whenever we are talking about capitalization or italicizing something, that's what you are looking at there. So here we have scientific names are always written in italics. If you're typing it on a computer, always use italics. If you're handwriting a Latin name, you're going to actually underline it because we don't really write in italics. And that scientific name is always going to have 2 parts. That's where the term binomial nomenclature comes from. You can see, obviously, each part is defined here. Bi meaning 2. We have not binomial, nomial meaning name, nomen, naming. Clature is a system. So binomial nomenclature is a 2-name naming system. Name number 1 is the name of the genus, and name number 2 is a word that is more descriptive for an individual species. So one example of a scientific name that you've probably heard of before, humans are known as Homo sapiens. They all belong to the genus Homo, and we're actually the only organism still on Earth today that belongs to that genus. There were some ancient examples of hominid ancestors that belong to the genus that are now extinct. But our species has the species descriptor of sapiens. So the scientific name of a human being is Homo sapiens. And you can see it if you type it. It would be in italics. If we're handwriting it, you're going to underline the words. So the two words have very specific meanings. The first word meaning the genus. A genus is going to be a group of organisms, a group of species of organisms that are more physically similar to each other. They are most likely to be closely related to each other, but remember they are separate species. If you have two things that are a separate species, when they try to reproduce, they cannot produce fertile offspring. That's how we're defining a species. If two things can reproduce and produce fertile offspring, then they would belong to the same species. When we write that genus name, we're always going to capitalize it in our scientific name. The second word, the species descriptor, is always going to be lowercase. And it always comes after the genus name. We're never going to write it alone. And to think about that and why that's important, let's look at the barn owl example that's given on this screen. This is a barn owl. It belongs to genus Tyto, T-Y-T-O. We know that because Tyto is the first word of its scientific name. The second word of its scientific name, alba, alba means white, and it probably comes from the fact that we see the white face on the barn owl. And that means that alba, as the species descriptor, we always have to have it along with the genus name of Tyto. Otherwise, we don't know what we're talking about, because if you remember the white oak that we started with earlier in the presentation, it also had the word alba as its species descriptor. So we have to have both words there in order to know which alba we're talking about, whether we're talking about a white oak or a barn owl. Now, scientific names are going to be really important in scientific communication. Sometimes there are multiple common names for a species. One that you've probably heard of before would be a roly-poly. It's also called a pill bug or a sow bug or a potato bug. A dandelion has multiple common names, different types of names to both describe the same sparrow. Mountain lion, cougar, and puma, three words that all mean the exact same organism. And also in terms of plants, let's don't forget those. We have red maple, scarlet maple, and swamp maple. All of them, however, refer to the one organism that has the scientific name Acer rubrum. So it's really important for scientists to make sure that they're very specifically communicating what exact organism they are talking about by using the accepted scientific name. So this classification system has 7 levels, or seven different taxa, if we use that term we talked about earlier. And this diagram here shows you what those 7 levels are. So make sure that you're writing this on your note sheet here, where it has the 7 taxa. We have kingdom, phylum, followed by class, then order, family, genus, and species. So these are our 7 different taxa, with kingdom being the most broad, species being the most specific. Now we do have a taxon higher than the level of kingdom, so really there's actually 8 if you want to make that change. 8 taxa, and this highest level here We didn't really start using this level until relatively recently, and that is the level of domain. Everything on Earth can be classified into 3 different domains, and each of those domains has kingdoms within them. Each kingdom is separated into phyla, each phylum separated into different classes, and so on and so forth. So let's look at an example here, and this example is for a gray wolf. Gray wolves belong to kingdom Animalia, and if you're wondering about the domain, all eukaryotic organisms belong to the same domain, and it's called eukarya. So you see different animals listed here. We have bats, we have dogs, birds, we have the lobster, we have jellyfish, we have fish, reptiles. They're all animals. Within the animal kingdom, we have phylum Chordata. These are the chordates, or things that have spinal cords. So still most of those animals, but now we see absent, are things like the jellyfish does not have a spine. The spider, no spine. Arthropods don't have a spine. The butterfly, no spine. Then we can further subdivide into class Mammalia. Those are only things that are mammals. They have hair. They nurse their young with milk. And you can see we have excluded things now like reptiles and fish. Order Carnivora would be generally carnivorous mammals, although some have adapted to have a little bit more of a varied diet. They might not just rely on meat. And then we have family Canidae, which are the dogs and their relatives. Genus Canis, which would be dogs and wolves, coyotes, things like that. And finally, the species of the gray wolf is Canis lupus. So our Linnaean system of classification is good, but not perfect. Remember, Linnaeus didn't know about genetic information or DNA sequences, so he really had to rely on physical similarities. And now that we have better technology in place, we know a little bit more about evolutionary relationships. So one thing that wasn't exactly correct initially was the classification of the panda. We see on the left here the giant panda, and on the right we have a red panda. Even though they're both called pandas, they're not really that closely related. The giant panda is much more closely related to bears, and the red panda more closely related to raccoons. Another example would be the thylacine. The thylacine is actually a marsupial. It's a pouched mammal, as opposed to the wolf, which is a placental mammal. So they are very distantly related. However, if you look at the thylacine, which is shown across the top here, versus the wolf shown across the bottom, very similar shape. They have a similar type of environment and behavior within that environment, an elongated nose to help with that sense of smell. And if you're interested in more information about the thylacine, there's a really cool YouTube video here about how it's closely similar to a wolf in terms of appearance, but that's just because of convergent evolution, not shared ancestry. So our final thought here in classification is going to be regarding dichotomous keys. You actually have a dichotomous key in your Power Notes sheet, right? It's a key for fish. So use this as an example, use it for practice, and make sure you know how to use a dichotomous key. We'll go through one example here, and this example is going to be with flowers. So in this first flower, we go line by line. Look at number 1. Is this flower, does it have leaves that are broad and toothed? No, not really. Are they long and slender? Yes. So we're going to go on to 3. Flower is not bell-shaped, but it is round and composed of many flowers, right? Looks like it has all of these separate little flowers. So that would be a cornflower. Sorry. What about this guy? Leaves are going to be broad and toothed here, so we're going to go to 2. 2A has numerous petals, form a round tufted flower. Doesn't look very tufty here. Petals are flat round layers. Go to 4. It's not yellow. It is red with 4 petals, so that would be a poppy. And finally, we have broad and toothed leaves going to number 2. The petals form a tufted flower, and this would be a thistle.